Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is about building cyber resilience, understanding and achieving ISO IEC 27001. So a very timely topic, kind of what we hear about all the news about information security. But I'd like to quickly just introduce myself and the other speakers that we've got today. So my name is Tom Harrison. I'm a partnerships manager here at BSI. I've been working with standards for sort of about 11 or 12 years or so now. And it's always good to be able to get in front of people who are kind of either approaching this for the first time or looking to sort of brush up a little bit on their knowledge of standards on their way towards certification. My colleague David will also be on the call. David is our sector lead for Digital Trust, who looks after our team of very talented, very experienced auditors who specialise in standards like ISO 27001 for information security, but also privacy management and business continuity in the ICT sector. And it's not just BSI that we're talking today. We're very happy to be joined by Zach from an organisation called Genius Within, who've kind of gone through the process that we'll be outlining today. And we'll be talking about it a little bit more from the client side and perspective of how they found the journey and their implementation. So in terms of what it is that we're going to be covering today, we're going to start off by covering what ISO 27001 actually is, a little bit about the benefits that our clients have seen from implementing the standards and being audited against it. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the actual process behind gaining that certification, that standard. So talking about some of the tips for implementation, what sort of areas you maybe want to avoid if you are going to go down this journey. And then when the sort of the back third of the webinar, we'll be doing a little bit of Q&A. So we'll be talking with Zach, where he'll be sharing his experiences, but then we'll also be taking any questions that anyone may have throughout the course of the webinar. So if you do have anything you want to ask, please feel free to stick it in the questions panel that you should hopefully see on the side of your screen. Don't feel like you need to wait for the Q&A. Just if anything pops up as we're presenting, stick it in the chat, and then we'll cover it towards the end. Next slide, please, Tish. Thank you very much. So a little bit of background on BSI. So the name stands for the British Standards Institution. So we've got a few roles, one of which is we are the UK's national standards body. So we are the only organisation that can write and publish British standards. Although it's probably worth pointing out that we don't decide the content of standards or when they should be created. We're an organisation that is by industry for industry. So industry comes to us with a sort of a specific need, a specific problem, and then our area of expertise is getting people around the table to kind of share what that best practice looks like, and then documenting it in a way that organisations can learn and follow from. So ISO 27001 started life as a British standard. It was kind of commissioned by the government, who saw in the sort of the kind of the late 90s the impact and threat that the kind of cyber attacks and ransomware, even back in those days, were potentially going to face organisations, and it's grown rapidly since then. So we're very proud of our role as a national standards body, but the side of the organisation that myself and David are from is what we call our assurance side. So we are the auditors. We're the people who come into organisations and do impartial assessments against what kind of processes and evidence they have in place to see whether or not it complies with the standard. And then we are the side that can actually issue certification off the back of it that can be used for tenders and contracts and marketing materials and that sort of stuff. We've got other sides of BSI that deal with things like testing and certification of products and EHS implementation. But I think we'll just kind of move on quickly whilst we talk about the ISO 27001 standard. Next slide, please, Tish. Thank you. So a bit of the background of BSI. We were founded in 1901. And we're one of the largest certification bodies in the world. So we have over 70,000 clients, and we don't just do the auditing, but we do training for people who are implementing of standards and looking to become like internal auditors. So over 164,000 people trained. And then whilst we are a British-based or headquartered organisation, actually the majority of the stuff that we do now sits outside of the UK. So over half of our 6,000 plus colleagues work in areas like Asia and America, where we're sort of looking at what we can do to simplify standards and usage and supply chains all across the world. And those of you who are good at any sort of quick maths, you know that if we were founded in 1901, this year is our 125th anniversary. So it's 125 years of raising standards and using them across industry. So yeah, we were one of the first national standards bodies and one of the largest certification bodies in the world. So we're very proud of ISO 27001, and yeah, always happy to talk about it a little bit more today. Next slide, please. So just before we get talking too much, we're going to run a quick poll just to understand where everyone roughly is on their journey. So the poll screen should be coming up shortly. So you've got 5 options there. So there's just starting out. So that's if you've maybe only heard of ISO 27001 for the first time and you're looking for some new information. Understanding the requirements. So is that you know, you're looking to understand this document that's kind of dropped on your desk and learn a little bit more about it. Beginning implementation, so maybe if a decision to reach ISO 27001 has been reached and you're now in the process of actually writing those processes. Seeking certification, so maybe you've actually done the work of implementation and now you're kind of on the journey towards getting audited, or maybe you're actually already certified, so you might have inherited an existing system and this is kind of you learning about what it is that you're going to be working with, or maybe it's just a bit of a good reason to brush up on some existing skills. So it looks like we've got roughly about over nearly 3/4 of people have voted. So it looks like we've got a nice bit of a spread, actually. It seems like most people here are looking at ISO 27001 for the first time. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully we can fill in a little bit of knowledge about the standard itself. And for those of you who are a little bit further along the journey, we've got some stuff towards the back end of the presentation that I think you'll find hopefully very useful. Tisha, we go back to the slides. Fantastic. So what is ISO IEC 27001? So for the interest of brevity, you will occasionally see it be written as ISO IEC. It's a joint standard, so it's published by the International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. Just for brevity, I'm going to refer to it as ISO 27001 throughout the course of this presentation. If you look kind of closely on the front cover, you will see it is ISO 27001 2023. That means that is the most recent version of ISO 27001 that was published. ISO standards are updated roughly sort of every 7 or 8 years or so. So ISO 27001 underwent its latest revision not too long ago, and the 2023 version is the most current one we are currently using. And in terms of its title, information security, cybersecurity, privacy protection, information security management systems requirements. So you've probably, I would take a hazard a guess that the majority of the people who are on this call are approaching this from the IT side of things. So while cybersecurity is clear and present there in the title, it's also important to point out that this is an information security standard. So it's not just looking at information technology, it's looking at all your physical storage of data, filing cabinets, whiteboards, physical security of premises, all that sort of stuff. So it's quite a broad and encompassing standard, and it does touch upon elements of privacy as well. So it's not a full-blown sort of GDPR compliant system, but obviously what we've kind of seen with the most recent version of the standard, information security and privacy, they're not the exact same thing, but they tend to go hand in hand with stuff. So it's important to kind of look at both of these things at the same time. And the requirements means this is an auditable standard. So it's going to be asking you a list of things that you shall be doing rather than a list of things that you should be doing. So this is what the assessment is entirely based around. Next slide, please, Tish. And when it comes to information security, it's based around kind of the 3 core principles of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Occasionally you see that be abbreviated down to CIA. But if you imagine it like a 3-pronged stool, when we talk about information security, I think confidentiality is sort of the first one that everyone goes to. We don't want our data leaking or going anywhere it shouldn't be doing. But actually, just as important, we don't want to be losing data as well. You know, I'm sure we've all lost an important document for somewhere when we've come to like moving house and seeing how much of a hassle that can cause. That would actually be an example of where integrity of data is an incredibly important thing. And that availability side of it as well. We don't want to be sort of locking down all of our data under a triple lock and key. If we need to be gaining access to it, on a millisecond by millisecond basis, depending on what our organization is. So it's how do you kind of create a system that balances those three integral pieces of it. And also it does touch on things, as I mentioned before, cybersecurity, but also controls in place for how you manage the supply chain. I think if anyone on the call here is of a larger organization, you'll likely know that the threat level that you're exposed to, a lot of it comes from outside of your organization, and sort of people who might have access to your data and your internal systems that maybe aren't necessarily directly employed. So that's a key and critical area. And I think if you look at some of the cyber attacks that have made sort of national news recently, the majority of them, a good chunk of them in particular, have been through the supply chain. So 27001 provides a lot of controls and methods for how you manage and reduce that risk. But I think the important thing to mention there at the end is this is a governance standard. So we'll talk a little bit more about what's in it, but essentially governance is organizational decision making. So how do you do things? What do you do? When do you do them? And that makes it a little bit different from some of the other cybersecurity stuff you might have been exposed to, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail now. Next slide, please. So in terms of the benefits to the standard, we survey our clients every few years and just sort of ask them what are the main benefits that they saw from implementing and becoming certified to ISO 27001. So the first two there, sort of the top and bottom two, of reducing business risk and helping us comply with regulations. I think if you asked any sort of senior leader, managing director, what it is that keeps them up at night, cybersecurity attack, hacking, breach, that sort of stuff. If it's not the number one kind of thing that's keeping them awake, it's certainly number two, or definitely in the top three. So actually having something that you can follow that is demonstratable international best practice is a key thing for sort of giving that little bit of confidence to the organization. And then we are also seeing, off the back of those increased risk levels, much more legislation coming into place in this space. So the EU Cyber Resilience Act, DORA, NIS2, all those sorts of things, much more kind of regulatory requirements being placed within organizations, and having this framework in place helps you manage all of those in a way that doesn't mean it's an incredible, or we can certainly reduce the admin burden. Can't promise it will go away, unfortunately. In the middle two, inspiring trust in our business and increasing competitive edge. It's no shame if to say that if you're looking at ISO 27001 because you've been sort of asked to gain the standard by either an existing client or a new piece of business that you're looking to win, or government framework, for example. It is how most people really end up looking at this standard, but they're really incredibly powerful tools for inspiring trust within existing suppliers, new customers that you're sort of maybe looking to win, and actually opening up brand new markets to sort of grow and expand the business. So whilst it's an information security tool first and foremost, it has got incredible commercial benefits to organizations that go through it. And the last two there, helping protect businesses, reduce the likelihood of mistakes. Having something in place like ISO 27001, it is a very in-depth standard, and it does require tangible, demonstrable change and reduction of risk within your organization. This isn't something that you just sort of download off the internet, print off a copy of it, and then sort of stick it in the tea room, and it sort of progressively goes moldier and kind of more frayed around the edges as everyone ignores it. This is a living, breathing system that exists within your organization and grows and adapts with time. But the benefit of that is it really does make you a much more safe and secure organization too. Next slide, please. So one of the kind of the underlying principles, not just of ISO 27001, but all of the management system standards that come out of ISO, is the concept of continual improvement. So you may have heard of this before if you've kind of operated in the space, especially if you've been involved in a standard like ISO 9001. You may have heard this before as the Deming cycle, Kaizen, PDCA. It's all essentially the same concept, but it's based on these four areas of plan, do, check, and act. So essentially we create a plan, which pretty much all of us as organizations are pretty good at doing. We then execute the plan, Again, most of us are pretty good at that. What we then sort of tend to naturally kind of slip on a little bit is the follow-up actions to that. So we created a plan, said we were going to do X. We set out to do X. What it is we actually achieved? Did we do X? Did we do Y? Was X better than we thought it was? Was X worse than we thought it was going to do? And then what we do is we take those findings and then we use that to form what the next sort of set of objectives for the organisation is going to be. So if it didn't work as we thought it was going to do, what are we going to do differently this time, rather than just sort of repeating the same actions? If it was better than what it was that we thought we were going to do we still need to keep doing it? Do we want to double down on it if we're getting better results from it than we previously thought? And then that feeds back into the start of our new plan. So it is a continuous cycle of improvement. And the idea is, if we're here today, how do we get to there tomorrow? How do we make sure we at least stay there? And week after that, how do we improve our performance going forward? And these standards are written in such a way that whilst this cycle is quite conceptual, the technical requirements in them are kind of a guidance that you can follow for how you end up creating this process. So if you go to the next slide, we'll be able to see what those clauses are actually going to look like. So it's a bit of a graphical representation of the standard. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every single thing listed here on the slide. Unfortunately, we do only have an hour with you all today. But if we see on the left-hand side, that box that says interested parties, internal and external. So what this means is when you're creating your information security system, you have to take into consideration anyone who's going to be affected by it and what it is that they want to be seeing from yourselves. So when we kind of list off our interested parties, I think the first ones we sort of instantly jump to tend to be our customers, because they pay the bills and the ones that keep the lights on. Regulators, depending on which industry you sit in. If you're a heavy regulated industry like utilities, for example, you probably have that conversation quite a lot. But also there's a lot of other interested parties. You'll be looking at what it is that we're doing with our data. For example, our staff. We hold a lot of important personal information there, like payroll, addresses, even things like medical information about some of them. So there's a lot of people there who'd be interested in what it is that we're doing with our data and how it is that we're managing it. So they kind of set our requirements. And then if we sort of look here on the right hand side in the colored boxes, these are the clauses of ISO 27001. So as we kind of follow our way through these, as we implement the standard, it has checks and balances and things in place to make sure that we're going to create a system that satisfies those needs. Again, we don't have time to go through all of these today, but what I will mention is the first two there in the black bold text of context of the organization, a really critical component of this. So ISO 27001 can be implemented by any organization in the world. So you could be a dog grooming salon, you could be a nuclear submarine pen. Both organizations are completely capable of implementing ISO 27001. However, their systems are going to look very different purely based off that context. It's going to look at things like risk level, complexity of the organization. Again, who are those stakeholders? Who's interested in what it is that you're doing? So what that does mean, whilst you can create a very powerful system that's going to drive real specific benefits for your organization, does mean everyone's going to look the same, which means everyone's going to look different, which means our implementation journey is going to take a little bit of time to create something that's really going to work for us. And then the second one there of leadership. Which I think is probably one of the most critical things in the standard, to be honest. I'm sure we've all kind of had that conversation of if only we could get our senior leaders to understand the importance of cybersecurity, if only we could get the investment in, or why is the organization saying we need to do one thing with cybersecurity and then on the other side we're doing something that's completely undermining the situation that we find ourselves in. So one of the first things the standard asks you to do is get your leadership on board, make sure they've got that commitment and they're setting the objectives for what it is that they want to be achieving it. And actually when it comes to the auditing and David's team come in, those senior leaders will be being audited. They will be a part of this this process, and it's important that they understand it. This isn't something you can completely outsource and wash your hands of. They're going to be a very critical component of this. And then the sort of the color coding there, what that allows you is where each of the clauses kind of fits into that plan, do, check, act cycle. Next slide, please, Tish. So what you might be thinking is that all sounds very good, sounds very logical, makes a lot of sense, but what it doesn't sound like is information security. He's not said passwords, he's not said encryption, he's not said any of those sorts of things. And that's true. ISO 27001, the majority of it, when you look at those clauses, is governance. So again, going back to those decision making. So when you actually sort of want to get into the world of information security proper, as some people might say, this is where we start looking at things like the controls of ISO 27001. So in the back of the document, in Annex A, there are 93 reference controls, which are essentially things that you can put in place within your organization to handle very sort of specific areas. So I kind of mentioned before of things like encryption, password management, levers policies, physical security, and how you kind of control that within your organization. And so this is kind of where a lot of the meat of the standard comes from. There are two standards which are worth looking at. Obviously, the first one is ISO 27001. The second, it's not a typo, ISO 27002. So 27001 is the requirements document that you'll be assessed against. ISO 27002 is a guidance document that provides a little bit more detail about some of those clauses. So whilst you might, sorry, not the clauses, the controls. So when you look at the 27001, it will have all those 93 controls in there, but they might be quite short, a couple of sentences, a little bit of information in there. 27002 goes into a lot more detail, gives you some examples where you might be using them, what they might be looking for. So if you're looking for sort of a very quick and easy thing to help you with your implementation, I would highly recommend getting hold of a copy of ISO 27002, and it will help you understand which of those controls are relevant and useful for your organization. Next slide, please. Cool. So the key steps in kind of the planning of ISO 27001. The first box there we sort of see is called scope, which is something I think if you're new to the world of ISO, this might be something you've not really come across before, but you get to define what the scope of your management system looks like. So if you're working for a small business that maybe only employs 10 people or so, odds are the scope of your organization, the scope of your information security system will be the scope of your organization. If you're working maybe for an organization that's got maybe 20 locations in it, for example, or maybe operates in multiple different countries, then what you might want to look at is defining your scope to cover maybe one particular geographical region, one specific business unit, maybe if you're part of a group of companies. And what that means is you don't have to implement the standard across the entire organization all at once. You get to sort of make that decision about what it looks like and sort of keep the project manageable depending on your time frame and the resources that you've got. Risk management, I think, is a key one. You don't necessarily have to do absolutely everything to completely remove all risk within your organization. Obviously, if you can, please do. But risk management is looking at things like, what are the critical components that are affecting your organization? What's going to have high impact? What's going to have high likelihood? And allowing you to sort of focus on those rather than just trying to boil the ocean and tackle every single threat that you might possibly be facing at the same time. And also we have here is our statement of applicability. So I mentioned those controls earlier on with the 93 of them. You don't have to implement all of them. So your statement of applicability is essentially a list of the controls that you have decided to implement within your organization. It's written down, it's defined, it's documented, and then you can see what an organization has in place from a control perspective, and actually also maybe why they may have decided that some of the controls aren't right for their organization. As I mentioned before, all organizations look different, so we wouldn't expect everyone to have all of them in place, but maybe if there is something in there that you might expect to see, sometimes having a bit of a justification for why it's not there is a pretty powerful thing as well. Next slide, please. Cool. So relationship between legislation and ISO 27001. I think again, if you're sort of new to standards, this is your first foray into them. I think a lot of people tend to get naturally a little bit confused between the standards that we're talking about and things like trading standards. We tend to get confused between the two. the trading standards are legislative requirements, where if you dip below sort of a certain level, you're effectively your product or your service is really illegal to sell on the market, and then there's punishments and fines in accordance for that. The standards that we're talking to are international best practice or international and national best practice documents. So what that means is it's not about how do you comply with the legislation. Obviously, there is a component of that of ISO 27001. Actually, what we're looking at is how do we achieve what good looks like. Legislation sets our absolute lowest minimum that we can't possibly drop below. The standards set what good looks like. So what should an organisation be aiming for? What should we be striving for? What do the top performers within their industry look like? That's kind of what that standard is particularly aiming for. And also this legislation tends to be written in a form that lawyers can use to sort of penalise and take to court. The standards that we're talking about are written from the perspective of the user. So how can you implement this with an organisation to get value rather than a mechanism for punishment and fines? So much more user friendly. You'll be pleased to hear. Next slide, please. Good stuff. So now I'll hand over to my colleague David, who's going to talk a little bit more about the auditing process and actually what it looks like when we get up on site. So David, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Tom, and good morning to everyone. So yeah, Tom's given us a good overview of 27001 and the management systems themselves, but you may be having questions around what the certification journey looks like. So what we've done here is a simplified version of that journey, and as Tom said, depending on the organisation and your scope, this could look very different, and the timelines, as listed on the bottom, could range drastically. But to give you a bit of an overview, the boxes in blue are areas which your organisation would take control of, and the areas in the sort of reddy colour are where you might have interactions with BSI along the way. So obvious point to start is for the certification journey is get the standard and own a copy of the standard. You'd be surprised actually how many times we turn up to audits and clients don't even own a copy of the standard. So get a copy of the standard, take the time to read and digest it and try and understand it in the context of your organisation. From there, you can then decide on your implementation plan and how you're going to roll that out across your business before looking at where you would be in terms of the certification journey. Have you implemented the system and started to build your system? There is an optional part which BSI can offer, which is called a gap analysis. This isn't part of the formal certification process or assessment, but we would come in, work with you, and look through your system as you built it to see how it aligns with the requirements of the standard. We're not auditing or testing the system at that point, but looking to see what you've got in place to identify whether it would meet the requirements of the standard. At the end of that gap analysis, we would leave you with a report and essentially a list of areas where there are gaps, which would become a to-do list for you to progress as you move forward. Whether you opt for that with BSI or not, I suggest that everyone that will probably undertake their own gap analysis to ensure their readiness for progressing at that point. Obviously, any outputs from the gap analysis you would need to implement and put forward before you progress to the formal certification stage. So the certification audit is split over two parts, stage 1 and stage 2. Both of them form the certification audit themselves, after which a recommendation for certification is made. Stage 1, which we often will deliver remotely, is kind of a high-level review, often documentation-based, really looking to see that you've got the bones of the structure and the management system in place. You've got processes in place, you've got plans in place for audits, management reviews, all of the inputs that we need so that we can be confident when we come back for the stage 2, at which point we're going to test the system, that the system's in place and ready to progress. There may be gaps at stage 1, and we will raise them as non-conformities within the reports, but they're not hugely critical at that point. Again, they become more of a to-do list for you to take forward. So following that stage 1 assessment, actions for yourself to continue to implement the system as you've planned, but to correct any of the gaps that we may have found ahead of the stage 2 audit, at which point we're going to formally test that system. The stage 2 audit is generally a longer duration and will cover all of the clauses and controls relevant to your organisation at that point. So we'll be really testing the system at this point, looking for it working effectively, and ultimately we're looking to be able to make a recommendation for certification at the back end of that. Once we've done that, if we're in a good place, you'll be issued with a certificate, your 27001 certificate, which will have a 3-year expiry date on it. And then we move into a process of continuous assessment. So that means we visit you either on a 6-monthly or annual basis, but at least once a year, to sample the management system as we go forward. Years 1 and years 2 are a sampling base, so around a third of the duration we will delivered across stage 2, and we'll be sampling across the different controls and requirements at that point. And then year 3, when your certificate expires, we conduct what we call a recertification audit, again a top to bottom audit of the system, where we would then reissue a new certificate beyond that. Next slide, please. So a few tips for implementation, and Tom alluded to some of these earlier. So leadership is a key part of any management system. So hopefully you're all sitting here now interested in 27001 because your leaders are asking you and saying that we need this, but it might not be the case. So do ensure that your leaders are engaged early, bought into the process. As Tom alluded to, they will be part of the audit process and they will be held accountable for their commitments within the management system. So please ensure that they're engaged, they're available, and that they realise that this is a continual process. So it won't be a one-off. We will be seeing them at different points throughout the audit cycle to ensure that that commitment remains in place. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you've already got a management system in place and certified, something like 9001 or 14001, all of these management systems now are built around a high-level structure, which means the bones of those core clauses are the same. So if you've got it in place, use that. Use the structure you've already got in place and see how you can implement your security management system linked with that. And make the standard work for you. These are tools, these are business tools to improve your organization. The standard can be applied in many different ways. And it's not about reinventing a process, creating something new. Look at what you do and how you do it and applying the standard to that, as opposed to trying to create something completely new to meet the requirements. And don't create documentation for documentation's sake. One of the most common non-conformities we find is where an organization has over-documented, written overly complex procedures, and then we come in and they're not following those procedures. They've reverted back to their business as usual process, which in most cases might have been fine, but they've documented something different and aren't following that process. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the pitfalls to avoid, we've talked about it, and I'll say it's worth saying again, not having read the standard, not owning a copy of the standard. Seems a bit obvious, but it is something we see probably more often than we should. So do take the time to read and understand the standard and ensure that you understand where you're going with it in terms of implementation. Don't wait for perfection. As Tom said, this is about continual improvement. You know, if you wait to the point that you think your system is absolutely perfect, you could be 2, 3, 4 years down the line for certification. You can progress with certification even if there are gaps in your system, even if we identify non-conformities along the way. It's about then how we demonstrate the continual improvement, the learnings and the processes beyond there. Tom alluded to the scope of certification. So defining the scope of certification and the boundaries of which you're working can be really key. Again, if you're a large organization, it might be too much to look for certification all in one go. So could you, reduce the scope of your management system, the scope of certification, start there and then add on other parts of your business or other sites as we move forward. And get the dates booked in. So having a date, even if it needs to move for your certification, not only ensures that we've got auditor availability, but also gives you a time frame to work to. And what we often find is that clients who don't have these time frames slip. And so having some formal time frame to work to will help you meet the targets you've set. Next slide, please. Thank you. A few other pitfalls to avoid. So this isn't an IT standard. This is a management system standard. I think 27001 in the past has been a lot thought about as an IT standard, but certainly the revision in 2022 made it much more of a holistic business standard. So this is looking at your business and the way you work. Of course, there are technical controls which are going to link with your IT systems. But as Tom said, this is also about people. It's about hard copy documents. It's about physical security, clear desk policies. It's the whole raft of information security. So it's not just a focus on IT. I've alluded to it before, but don't create shadow processes. You know, look at the process that you have in place. Look at what you actually do, and then look at that process and see how that meets the requirements of the standard. It may be that that process meets everything within the standard, or just needs a small tweak. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't create a second process to run parallel, because you'll fall foul along the way. In terms of conflict of interest, if you're implementing a management system, one of the areas when we come to things like internal audits, you can't mark your own works, so you can't conduct an internal audit of your own system. So think about who else or how else you might look for support in those areas to really give you an independent view of the system, and identify gaps along the way. And looking at your risks, again, as Tom said, if we look at every risk and we want to apply controls and mitigate every risk, you're going to hugely overcomplicate your system. We're not going to define for you, and the standard doesn't define for you, what risks. This is a business decision. You identify the risk, you identify your level of appetite for that risk, and the controls you want to put in place. So it's within your grasp to define the management system and the way you want to work. Next slide, please. So there was quite a number of people on the call who have never been through a certification audit, so I thought it might be useful to talk through what that might look and feel like, certainly from a BSI point of view. So firstly, one of the key things for our point of view is that audits would only be delivered by competent and experienced auditors. So all of our 27,001 auditors at BSI are information security specialists, and we recruit them on that basis. They come from a range of different industry sectors, so that we can come in and support you and understand your business and talk the language in terms of information security. In terms of the delivery methods for the audits, we have a number of different approaches. We can be fully remote using something like Teams or Zoom. We can be fully on site, and sometimes we're required to do that under certain security requirements, or we can operate what we call a hybrid audit, which is a blend of the two. This is actually our preferred method, because over many years since COVID of delivering in a hybrid fashion, we've found that hybrid audit actually gives us the best audit outcomes. Remote auditing allows us to really deep dive into documentation and procedures, whilst on-site gives us best visibility of things like physical security, staff awareness, and actually how it's working on the ground. So we'll probably look to deliver some sort of hybrid audit along the way. In terms of the audit itself, all audits will start with a formal opening meeting with your auditor, who will set the scene, confirm the plan, and if we've seen you before, discuss any changes to your business that we need to be aware of. And it's really important to realise that our auditors coming in are looking for positive evidence of how you meet the requirements of the standard and of your own procedures. We're not there as regulators to look for non-conformity or non-compliance. We're there to look for the positive evidence of how you meet the requirements. I have put there about your own procedures as well. So whilst there are requirements of the standard that we obviously audit against, if you write procedures and you say we will do X, then we will be expecting you to demonstrate you doing X along the way as well. As we're looking for that positive evidence, that will come through a various range of means, through discussions, reviews of documentation, site walkarounds, show and tell, show us the procedure, talk us through what you're doing and how we get there. And that will involve engagement from across the company, from your senior leaders to those on the shop floor. So this isn't about someone who owns the management system talking to us for the whole audit. We want to see how it works in practice on the ground. If there are any gaps identified, and we refer to those as non-conformities within management systems, they will be identified at the time with you, so there'll be no surprises at the end. We raise them as we find them, give you a chance to look for any supporting evidence that might allow us to reduce or remove those non-conformities before they're raised. And then at the end of every audit, we will have a formal closing meeting where we'll confirm the results and the outputs of the audit, and confirm any non-conformities, discuss any best practice that we've seen, any good practice, and discuss next steps from there. And a formal report will be issued following every audit, detailing all of those findings, allowing you to know where to work and the gaps you're going to fill going forward. And then where appropriate, a certificate will be issued or updated following independent technical review within our business. Next slide, please. So why might you choose BSI for your 27001 certification partner? So Tom alluded to, we exist to create positive change for people and the planet, and digital trust, of which information security forms a key part, is one of our key domains that we're focusing on as a business. We are independent as an organisation, and we have global coverage. So if you're a large global organisation, we can support your certification needs across the world. As well as having in-house teams, we will also have technical experts within our business who can support your business and add extra value to the service. And as Tom said, 125 years of raising standards across the business. In the UK, for instance, as well, we focus very much on our in-house teams. So we have a team of over 40 information security auditors in the UK, which is supported by a smaller team of associates, but our focus is really that internal resource delivering that expertise. And we reinvest our profits into our business to drive that improvement and difference we want to see across the world. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to invite Zach to join us for some questions and answers. So I think we're going to stop sharing the slides. Thank you. And Zach has very kindly joined us from one of our clients called Genius Within. Zach and Genius Within have recently been through their certification journey with BSI. So instead of me and Tom talking about the BSI approach and what's appropriate, we thought it'd be really useful to get Zach's take. So Zach, thank you very much for joining us this morning and yes, giving us your time today. So Zach, what would be really interesting is for you to give us a bit of an overview of what your certification process was like with BSI.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. Yeah, look, there's loads of words that I could use to describe the process, but I think the main one that kind of stood out for me is the collaboration. Really, you touched on it previously. There's, the staged certification process meant that there's plenty of kind of gates that you go through before you get to that full audit at the end. And that was what really stood out, was the fact that kind of working with BSI helped us identify, through that gap analysis, where are the gaps necessarily. You're not going to get these things right 100% of the time. You're not going to get it, 100% there first time asking, especially if you're kind of like an SME. We're not big Silicon Valley tech companies, so it's okay to not get it right 100% first time. But yeah, it's that collaboration that we have with BSI, with the auditors, to actually look at, where are those gaps? How does that translate into our platform? How does that translate into our business? And then that gave us the information that we needed to go off and then, put the things in place that we needed to do, and go through that continuous improvement loop that we spoke about earlier, the plan, do, check loop. So yeah, definitely really, really collaborative process.
And we hope to be, certification partner is the kind of term we use. We want to work with yourself and other organisations to help your business. As I say, we're not regulators; we're there to sort of drive improvements, which is brilliant. So thank you. So when you first started looking at 27001, what were your first steps that you took to become certified?
Yeah, so I think the first step was for us to kind of take a step back and look at things from like a bird's eye view, holistic level, really look at our platform, make sure that all stakeholders within the business, like you said, it's not kind of just one person driving this. This is a multi-stakeholder approach. So it's making sure that everybody, internally really understood what the platform was, who our users are, who are we serving, and the type of data that we're storing and what we're doing with that. So it's really kind of getting everybody on the same level and same page, so that enabled us to kind of move forwards again quickly to identify where the risk is, and the kind of controls that we need to have in place. So yeah, it was that kind of like taking a step back initially. We're quite lucky we weren't starting from scratch, due to the kind of nature of the data that we collect. We already had policies in place, procedures in place, talk about encryption, talk about, whatever other kind of cybersecurity stuff. So we kind of had a little bit of a head start, but we weren't complete. Like I said before, we're going to be 100% complete. So, there were some places that were lacking in documentation, and there were some places that was lacking in evidence as well, right? This isn't just about saying, here's a document saying that we'll do these things, but it's actually showing evidence that, you are doing those things, right? So yeah, that kind of initial reflection period kind of gave us the time to get everything out on the table and kind of identify what those gaps are, and from there it became a lot more of a kind of focused and manageable process moving forwards.
Right. And how long was that time frame between starting, to focus on it and achieving certification?
Yeah, so I think it was about 6 months. So yeah, that was from kind of a standing start. But like I said, we already had a lot of stuff in place, and I'm sure that's the same for most of the businesses that are joining us today, right? Yeah, it was about 6 months, and that gave us the time to, like I said, identify where those gaps are, really go in and make sure that we've got evidence to show that we are doing those things. Yes, we've got a disaster recovery plan for if a database becomes corrupted. Luckily, touch wood, to this point that's not happened, but we have to be able to show that those processes that we had would work, right? So yeah, it's all about building that kind of solid foundation and making sure that we can move forward. But yeah, it was about 6 months, give or take.
Brilliant, right. And you've alluded to a few there, but what sort of challenges did you face along the way? I'm sure it wasn't all plain sailing right through certification.
Yeah, of course. So look, I mean, it's no small task becoming certified. As you said, it's not just about kind of documenting processes. It's about people. It's about making sure that the right people are trained in the right areas, and you're taking the whole business along on that journey, right? So it's not a challenge, but it's something you need to be aware of. And yeah, like I said before, it's about not just saying you can do those things, but actually proving it. You need to make sure that you do have evidence. The one I touched on before, disaster recovery plan. We had to then mimic, our databases becoming corrupted, and then showing the fact that our processes would bring things back to a stable state, etc. So yeah, I think that's kind of where the most amount of work for us is yeah, moving from kind of like intent to actual kind of evidence and tangible proof that those things were actually doing the things that we said they would.
Yeah, brilliant. So now you're certified. So firstly, congratulations on achieving certification. But what sort of benefits are you seeing to your organisation now, having achieved 27,001?
Yeah, sure. So look, we work in an industry, and I'm sure this is the same for most people. It's ever changing, it's fast paced. So we have to, as a business, we have to be on our toes, and we have to move quite quickly and be quite agile. And that translates into our platforms as well, right? They are changing. There's new things being introduced, new bits of data that we're collecting, etc., etc. So having the controls and the processes and the policies in place that we've got through achieving ISO 27001 enables us to move at a speed without inheriting any unnecessary risk, right? Because we know that the back door is shut, and that's locked down, and that gives us the confidence and the ability to move at speed. Whereas before, you'd be doing that, you'd always having to be second guessing things and making sure that things are done in the right way. So that was one piece. I think as well, we kind of went through ISO 27001 around the same time that we were starting to scale our digital team. So one of the things that's been a great benefit is having all those kind of documentation in place, right? In terms of onboarding new staff and getting them up to speed and getting them knowledge in terms of exactly what we're doing from a security point of view, from a data point of view. That has been a massive win for us. And then I think the final thing to end on, and this is, I think was one of the things that was touched in the previous slides, is from a commercial point of view. It puts a lot of trust into us from our clients. We deal with a lot of kind of tech teams and security teams and various international organizations, right? So having this compliance in place doesn't necessarily fast track that process, but it certainly just makes us all kind of talk from the same sing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. So yeah, it's kind of three-pronged, I would say, in terms of the benefits.
No, that's great. It's great to see those two, the internal benefits as well as the external benefits coming through already. So that's really good. So obviously, when you're looking at 27,001 and choosing, your certification partner, what made you choose BSI?
Sure. So we already had 9001 with BSI. So we already had that kind of relationship. We understood, how you operated and had a positive experience previously. But also, I think our IT manager at the time actually went through some of the your 27001 training quite early on. So that gave us a good understanding and a good kind of basis and foundation to grow on. So yeah, those two combination is why we moved forward with you guys. But yeah, I mean, the training, I think, was certainly a big part of that.
Brilliant, great. And really, for all of our people joining the call today, what advice and tips would you give them at the start of their certification journey?
Sure. I mean, I would say, be prepared to be very open and honest. We touched on it a few times now. You're not going to get everything right first time asking, right? So, obviously be prepared to celebrate the wins and the stuff that you're doing well. That's great. Champion that, but also, be open and honest with yourselves and with other stakeholders and other leaders within the business to say, look, we are going to identify areas that aren't going to be 100%. And this is a journey of continuous improvement. So yeah, it's just be prepared for that process. So yeah, if you come with that mindset, it's going to make the whole kind of process a lot easier.
Brilliant, that's great. So thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts today. There's a link in the chat to a video that your organisation has supported to give you a bit more about their journey. So anyone who would like to watch that, please do. But for now, thanks very much, Zach. We've got some probably Q&A at the end, so you may get pulled into that as well, if that's okay. But Zach from Genius Within, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Cheers, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Zach. So yeah, we'll move on to the Q&A portion now. So we've already got quite a few questions that have come in, which we'll start our way to work our way through. If there's anything that's cropped up during the presentation that you'd like to learn a little bit more about, or if you've got any questions for myself, David, and also Zach as well, please do stick it in the chat, and then we'll start working through those. I think the first question we always get is, will there be a copy of the slides? The answer is yes. There'll be an email sent around which will have the slides and the recording, a link to that video as well that Zach made with BSI. So I think the first question that's coming in is, do you have to implement all 93 controls, and how can they align with things like Cyber Essentials? So the answer to the first part of that question is no, you don't have to implement all 93 controls. One of the first steps you'll have to do is go through that list and decide which one's relevant for yourselves. What I will also say, though, is it's not an exhaustive list of controls. So whilst the 93 are in there, if there is, for example, something that your organization does that's very unique and specific to yourselves and maybe your products, your services, the industry that you work in that isn't in that standard, there is nothing to stop you from creating a new control and including that within your statement of applicability as well. So just because you see something that isn't in that annex doesn't mean you can't implement it in 27001. It is a flexible system, and you can create extra work for yourself if you really want, but some people do find it quite useful to use ISO 27001 to manage that. And then in terms of Cyber Essentials, I'd say probably the two most common information security certifications out there are Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO 27001. So it's quite likely you will either have one or the other, or potentially both. In terms of what they do and where they're different, Cyber Essentials is a snapshot in time assessment. So it's essentially looking at what have you got in place at this precise moment in time? What does your current defensive posture look like? Do you have everything in place now? So, and it's based around, so I think it's the 8 most common cyber attacks, I think, or the root causes of 80% of all cyber attacks. I think that was what the basis for the writing of Cyber Essentials was. So it's a useful standard. Definitely if you're a small business, I'd highly recommend looking at it, but it is looking at where you are currently now. ISO 27001 is more looking at actually where are you going to be in the future. So it's a bit more of an in-depth standard. You have to kind of you'll get involved in a lot more stuff like your leadership and your planning and that sort of thing. But it kind of gives you a little bit more future confidence. Obviously, if you actually use both of them together, it's actually a really powerful tool. So Cyber Essentials says, this is where we are today. 27001 says we're going to be a better place tomorrow. That's really useful. So yeah, certainly don't think that you have to pick one of the two or that you can't do both. Really useful and powerful tools. David, question here from the chat. How can we get buy-in from a senior leadership team that generally doesn't take cybersecurity or risk management seriously?
I think that's a really interesting and also probably quite difficult question to answer. I think it's, as Tom said, cyber risk and are going to be top of nearly all organisations' risk registers. So if your senior leaderships aren't realising that, then that's going to probably be a difficult conversation to have. I would start, there's lots of really useful statistics from the government. People like IBM produce a report every year on cyber risks, etc. Getting some of those stats and showing your senior leadership, it's like 1 in 3 organisations are affected every year in the UK with a cyber breach. Small organisations, it can be enough to put them out of business. Some of these statistics of what the real risks are to the organisation may just be enough to open their eyes to it. It's about, with anything, it's about leadership owning those risks and understanding those risks. So, all you can do is really try and get them to understand what the risks are, what the impact might be, and hope that that's enough along the way. BSI do offer a senior leadership briefing where we can come in and talk to your senior leaders around risks and things like that. So that could be an option. But I think I would start with those statistics and really looking at the risks and the impacts to other businesses.
Fantastic. Quite an interesting meaty one just coming from the chat, actually. Would you recommend aligning ISO 27001 with the procedures or processes in place to meet 9000 and 14001 requirements to create an integrated management system, or keep it completely separate as an ISMS? So just for the benefit of kind of people who maybe didn't understand some of those numbers that we sort of threw around, ISO 9001 and 14001 are the world quality and environmental management systems, respectively. And the management systems published by ISO, they've got quite a lot of commonality between them. So things like that plan, do, check, act cycle, as I mentioned before, that kind of appears in all those standards. Clauses around leadership, planning, context of organisation, that all sits within every standard as well. So there's a lot of similarities between them. And what you do sometimes find is organisations will do what's called integrating the systems. So rather than having a separate quality or environmental or information security, merge them all together. So rather than having a quality policy and a health and safety and an environmental policy, have a QHSE policy, all in one place. Reduces administrative work, reduces auditing time. Quite a handy thing to do. So we do see quite often that 9000 and 14001 will be merged together. Obviously, what you tend to see with information security, it tends to be a little bit focusing on different areas of the organisation. So integration doesn't necessarily have to be a binary thing. It's not entirely integrated or not integrated. You can decide what areas you sort of want to share. So document control is a really good example. A document control system that satisfies ISO 9001 will satisfy 27001, so it kind of makes sense to use the same things there. However, when it comes to things like internal audit, for example, the areas you're going to be looking at for information security are probably going to be quite different from environmental management. So it's up to you and your organization, really. You can implement them, you can integrate them together, but I think we generally tend to find people would integrate quality, health, safety, and environmental with each other, and information security tends to get integrated alongside things like business continuity, service management, those sorts of areas put together. But it's your organization, it's your system. So we're running a little bit close to time, actually. David, one last one for yourself. If we are still receiving findings on our internal audits, can we continue with certification?
Yes, absolutely. So we're there, as part of the certification, we're testing to see the system is working. So if you're identifying non-conformities through your internal audits and your processes and through your corrective action plans, then your system is working. So absolutely, we would expect to see that within the system. We would expect to see that within our audits, and that's just good evidence that your system and your processes are working. So yes, don't let that be a blocker.
Fantastic. Yeah. A good example, I think, of like not waiting for perfection, I think, as well. Like finding things, as you said, it's a great example that your audits are actually working properly. So I think a couple of last questions just from me. So does ISO 27001 help us comply with the new Cyber Resilience Act? It doesn't give you a kind of a passport instantly to compliance, but it does help. So if you look at things like what is coming up in the Cyber Resilience Act, kind of one of the main clauses in there is going to be making sure products and services don't have any known vulnerabilities. So there's a question there of actually how are you managing that? How do you make sure you know what those known vulnerabilities are? And ISO 27001 has got controls in place for things like threat intelligence. So how are you? What processes do you have in place for finding out about the latest day zero attacks, breaches, weaknesses in systems and software that you might be using or providing to clients? So having 27001 in place, whilst it might not necessarily get you a tick in the box to instantly comply with the Act, it provides you with those frameworks and those tools that you will need to eventually reach compliance. And I think one last question, unless another one comes in, how much does certification cost? So the certification cost is dependent on effectively how much auditing it takes to get your organization through to certification. And that auditing, those days of auditing, that's calculated based on size and complexity and risk of the organization. So roughly how many employees do you have, how many sort of different pieces of technology have you got, and what sort of data are you actually handling? So an organisation that employs 1,000 people and handles Ministry of Defence critical security information will have a much higher risk profile and therefore more auditing and a higher cost than maybe a small business that employs 10 people doing some bespoke software development. So if you do, unfortunately we can't give an off-the-shelf answer here, but if you do ever want to just find out for your organisation, please just do get in touch. I think we're going to be sending a survey around after this webinar, where you can fill it in, and then if you want to get indicative costs for your organisation, we're happy to provide that sort of commitment free. So just before we go, we've got a couple of things for you all to take away. Our marketing team have developed an information security roadmap that kind of talks through a lot of the steps that David mentioned in the auditing and the implementation process, but also provides links to a few of the tools that we've got with things like self-assessment checklists and all that sort of stuff. So if you scan the QR code there, you'll be able to download a copy yourself. As a thank you for taking the time out of your day and attending the webinar, we're also doing a discount off ISO 27001 training. So if you want to learn, either go on one of our implementation courses or train yourself into becoming an internal or lead auditor, the code there for Cyber15 will get you 15% off those training courses until the end of June 2026. So thank you very much to our speakers today, to Zach for joining us from Genius Within. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise in the journey. David, thank you for talking us through the technical side of things. Thank you to the team who've been operating in the background and helping the webinar run very smoothly today. But most importantly, thank you to you all as well for taking the time out of your days to join us. If you have got any sort of follow-up questions or you want to learn a bit more, please do reach out. We're more than happy to help. Hopefully get your organisations through to certification and implementation. So once again, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.